In our opening video in this series, we deconstructed the opposing definitions of woke in order to amplify the word's actual meaning. Aware of and actively attentive to important facts and issues, especially issues of racial and social justice. Applying that to the original series, we concluded that Star Trek has been woke since its earliest days. However, we will be continuing in the progressive tense. It's hardly a spoiler by now to say, after the so many decades, that Star Trek The Next Generation was woke, in the non-co-opted sense, or politically liberal if you prefer. The only debate is to what degree. As it branched out into a new century, with a new ship and a new crew, The Next Generation continued and expanded upon the social and political commentary that had characterised its predecessor, shining a light on a yet broader array of social injustices and inequalities. It is true that, on certain issues, The Next Generation has rightly been reproached for failing to replicate the boldness and forward-thinking of the original series, which itself had always led the conversation. By and large, however, in comparison, The Next Generation was woker. Finally, if what we're doing here is the deconstruction of woke in order to re-promote it, it is perhaps worth quoting the following from Bruno Perrault's queer theory, The French Response. The deconstruction of norms cannot be dissociated from their reproduction. We know that our use of woke runs the risk of reproducing it in the pejorative, but in order to point out that Star Trek has always been positively and optimistically progressive, that's a risk we'll have to take. With that in mind, I'm Sean Ferrick for TrekCulture, and here is 10 times Star Trek The Next Generation went woke. Number 10. No man to no one. One thing we learned from the now world-famous speech in the opening credits of the original series was that there is no reason you can't split the infinitive. The rule against it was mostly the invention of a few particularly insistent grammarians of the 19th century. Today, no sensible grammar will tell you not to boldly go. If Kirk broke the seemingly hard and fast strictures of syntax, it would be up to The Next Generation, with a nod at the end of Star Trek VI The Undiscovered Country, to work on the semantics. The man in No Man Has Gone might well have meant a human being, a person, but it did its definitional work through exclusion, or, as the Oxford English Dictionary states, until the 20th century, to include women by implication, though referring primarily to males. The switch to no one in Picard's version opened up a new space that included women not by implication, but by design. Semantics is one thing, concrete action on gender equality is another. In that sense, The Next Generation did break ground from the very beginning with the character of Natasha Yar, in particular in a non-stereotypical gender role. The original series infamously ended on an episode that basically said women weren't allowed to be starship captains and should just be happy with their lot. But The Next Generation strove to include women in top-level command positions, all the way up to admirals such as Shanthi, Brand and Nechayev, carrying on from the work that was begun by actress Madge Sinclair in Star Trek IV The Voyage Home. Number 9. Let's talk to Riva. Nestled within Season 2, there is a gem of an episode that doesn't get anywhere near the attention it deserves. Loud as a Whisper is the very essence of Star Trek, delivering an optimistic, inclusive message through the lens of sci-fi, and continuing the work of positive representation. In Loud as a Whisper, the Enterprise is diverted to the Ramatis star system to pick up renowned mediator Riva, who has been called upon to assist in peace negotiations between two warring factions on Solaris 5. Riva had also previously negotiated various treaties between the Federation and the Klingons, and happens to be deaf. As a means of communication, Riva used a 3-person telepathic chorus that acted as interpreters for his thoughts. Playing Riva was Howie Seago, who is deaf also. It was he who pitched the idea for Loud as a Whisper to producers in the first place. As Seago related in an interview with Trek Untold, the chorus of interpreters was also his idea, based off his experience as a theatre actor. In the first draft of the script, Riva was supposed to use a mechanical device to communicate with his chorus that would then have failed, leading him to be taught to speak overnight. Seago refused to act this, however, even if it meant losing the part, feeling that it would serve to propagate the false idea about the deaf community that children can learn to speak easily overnight. That was the one cultural thing I could not perpetuate, Seago added to Trek Untold. Thankfully, producers agreed with Seago, who then came up with the decidedly brilliant ending that did make it to screen. In that, Riva alone returns for an extended stay on Solaris to teach the warring factions sign language so that they can communicate with him, and in doing so, learn to communicate with each other. That's not just a positive message both for and about the deaf community, it's a lesson in diplomacy that should be adopted worldwide. It would be, as Councillor Troy said, time well spent. Number 8. The cheerleader for mental health. Marina Sirtis famously called the fabric-saving uniform she sported for Deanna Troi in Encounter at Farpoint her cosmic cheerleader outfit. Whilst the scant never made it past Season 2 of The Next Generation, by then in trousered form until its temporal reoccurrence in All Good Things, it remains eminently popular with fans and perhaps could have merited its own entry on this list for its progressively gender-defying attempt at a 24th century dress code. However, it's the second meaning of the cheerleader that interests us. Commander Troi was notable for her presence at the centre of the bridge, just next to Captain Picard in the very first scenes of The Next Generation. In Encounter at Farpoint, it is Captain Picard who then refers to Troi as Councillor for the first time. There has been some confusion since as to whether this title was intended to mean one who gives counsel or advice, or onboard therapist. In fact, it was both. Troi was always meant to be the cheerleader for mental health in the 24th century. The casting call for the character, cited in the Star Trek The Next Generation Companion, clearly stated that Deanna Troi serves as the starship's chief psychologist. Later, in the Star Trek The Next Generation Writer/Director's Guide, or the series Bible, it gave the following information for Troi. Humanity and Starfleet have learned that a starship is as dependent of efficiently operating human relationships as on efficient mechanisms and electronic circuits. In cases where starships encounter other life forms in deep space, the Councillor's role is considered second in importance only to the Captain and First Officer. The fact that The Next Generation placed such primacy on mental health and well-being from day one is a testament to the power of Gene Roddenberry's ever-evolving vision of the future. As Marina Sirtis told Star Trek Mission New York in 2016, "When I got cast, Gene Roddenberry said that it was his belief that by the 24th century, mental health would be as important as physical health, and that you'd need a counsellor on board a ship. I think we need it sooner, we need it now." He felt, and he was right, that it's as important as physical health. The Next Generation continued to be attentive to mental health by presenting a normalised vision of visits to a therapist and, if not always entirely successful, in depicting the mental health difficulties of Lieutenant Barclay. For now, cosmic and otherwise, we all need to be cheerleaders. Number 7. Non-binary Binars, non-binary Borg. They're not gentlemen or ladies, Commander. They're a unified pair, says Commander Quinteros to Commander Riker about the Binars in the opening scenes of 1100-1001. For television of the late 1980s, that's quite the progressive critique of gendered assumptions. If we delve further, however, we find that the episode is even more radical. We would argue that, in it, the Binars come to represent both the Western gender binary and its deconstruction. Within Binar, as given by writers Maurice Hurley and Robert Lewin, is the performative "I pronounce you binary," after the machine code that is the opposition of two possible states, 1 or 0. Each binar of the unified pair is the symmetrical reflection of the other, both physically and in code, 1001 for example. Commander Riker misreads this binary computer code as binary gender, the either-or of male-female, masculine-feminine, but as we learnt from Commander Quinteros, the thing that makes them appear to be binary gendered is their binary, binar-E code, but in reality, it is the very thing that makes them non-binary. The Binars hold up a mirror to our pre-programmed expectations on gender to decompile them. Nonetheless, despite being told from the outset, Riker does continue to misgender the Binars when they are showing him the new holodeck setup. Moving ahead to the next season for Q-Who, when Captain Picard goes down to engineering to meet the Borg drone that's just transported in, the titular Q reappears over his shoulder to say, "Interesting, isn't it? Not a he, not a she, not like anything you've ever seen." Like Q, this statement could be interpreted in several different ways. It could be retrospectively argued that transposing the non-binary onto the otherness of the Borg replicates the age-old homophobic trope that queers are coming to convert you. Number 6. The space plays the thing. Nichelle Nichols once pointed out to Gene Roddenberry that what he was doing for the original series was writing morality plays, to which he apparently, jokingly replied, "Shh, they haven't figured that out yet." As we noted in our 10 times Star Trek was woke, the original series triumphed and stumbled in its allegorical approach to the issues of the day. In that, Star Trek The Next Generation was no different. Not every episode was a resounding metaphorical success, but each did try to catch the conscience, not of Shakespeare's king, but of the audience. Let's take the high ground. The title is admittedly more on the nose than Bajoran rhinoplasty, but this was the third season episode so pointedly political that it was banned from broadcast by the BBC and RTE. You'd have needed to be woke, as in literally awake, seriously early in the morning when the BBC did finally air The High Ground for the first, and apparently only, time at 2:39 AM GMT on the 29th of September 2007. The reason? One of Data's examples of terrorism as an effective way to promote political change, as the Irish reunification of 2024. As the High Ground writer Melinda Snodgrass related in Captain's Logs, the unauthorised complete Trek voyages, the whole episode was intended to be a parallel for Northern Ireland. The geopolitical allegories continued in later seasons. The two-parter Unification of 1991, for example, was inspired, at least in part, by German reunification. Unification also served as a tie-in to Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country, itself drawing reference to and from the Chernobyl disaster and the fall of the Soviet Union. Political allegories have already shifted before that, of course, with Worf on the bridge of the flagship. Number 5. Gender reveal! Congratulations, Data, it's a girl, declares Deanna Troi as Data's child is descended down from the laboratory alcove in The Offspring. The episode has quite rightly been praised for its stance on gender identity, in that Data allows his child to choose their own gender and appearance rather than choosing for them, a radical statement for television in the early 1990s. To frame that within the context of this article, that might be the most woke thing on this list. The episode also invites, we feel, another queer reading entirely. That is why you must choose a gender, Lal, to complete your appearance, Data replies to Lal when they say they are inadequate because they are gender neuter, or what now might be considered as agender, gender non-binary, or genderqueer. Data's "you must choose" is, in fact, a warning that the parameters for the android's decision are strictly predefined, such that Lal will be reinscribed back into the matrix of heterosexuality and gender normativity. Lal was never given the option to remain non-binary. Like contemporary gender reveal parties in the real world, blue or pink, boy or girl, Lal's unveiling in the lab reconcretizes their identity in line with the gender binary. Lal must now exist in a permanent state of human female, in Troy's earlier words, for her lifetime, reiterated and reenacted by "It's a Girl" in the performative style of Picard's Make It So. By the end of the episode, we witness the terrible consequences the imposition of societal gender norms can have. Number 4. Gender trouble. The late 1980s, early 1990s was a heady time for queer activism and queer theory. Groups like Queer Nation and ACT UP emerged to fight against homophobia, for LGBTQIA+ rights, and for action on HIV/AIDS. In 1990, Judith Butler published the revolutionary work Gender Trouble, Feminism and the Subversion of Identity, that challenged the very essence of our ideas on gender, and, along with Eve Kosofsky-Sedgwick's Epistemology of the Closet in particular, was one of the foundational texts of queer theory. At the time, there was also a good reason to believe that Star Trek was going to cross its final frontier of homosexuality. Star Trek: The Next Generation queer characters joined the Enterprise crew, American LGBTQ+ magazine The Advocate punned and prognosticated in the title of an article from August 1991. Later that same year, the Los Angeles Times announced Star Trek is on another bold journey, and that this season gays and lesbians will appear unobtrusively aboard the Enterprise in the 24th century. The apparent certainty came from a statement Gene Roddenberry had released to The Advocate in July 1991, which read, "In the 5th season of Star Trek: The Next Generation, viewers will see more of shipboard life in some episodes, which will, among other things, include gay crew members in day-to-day circumstances." Whether or not that promise would ever have come to fruition is impossible to say. Roddenberry's declining health had meant his day-to-day involvement in The Next Generation was minimal before his death in October 1991. Rick Berman and Michael Piller were already firmly in charge. As we know, there were no gay characters in Season 5, but we did get an episode that attempted to deal with the issue of homophobia. The Outcast was written by Jerry Taylor, who, in Cinefantastique Volume 23, numbers 2 and 3 of October 1992, firmly framed her script as a gay rights story. Taylor added, it absolutely, specifically and outspokenly dealt with gay issues. In the same Cinefantastique article, Michael Piller also commented on the genesis of the episode. What it came down to was Roddenberry had been barraged by letters and had discussed with us before his death the possibility of having two men hold hands in some scene, which was totally irrelevant to the issue of homosexuality. I didn't think, nor did Rick, that was an appropriate way to do a story that addressed the issue of sexual intolerance. Make of that what you will. In allegorical fashion, and not least in the directness of its title, The Outcast does effectively deal with the matter of homophobia, and arguably transphobia, through Soren of the Genii, a species for whom gender is considered unnatural, even a perversion. In the episode, Soren comes out to identify as female, only to face the extreme prejudice of her society. I am tired of lies. I am female. I was born that way. I have had those feelings, those longings, all of my life. It is not unnatural, Soren proclaims in her devastatingly moving and impassioned speech at her trial, a speech that cannot fail to resonate in the most profound sense with any LGBTQIA+ viewer. The moment is a powerful rallying cry for love, openness and acceptance, and against the monstrous practice of conversion therapy, the Genai's psychotectic treatments. I do not need to be cured. What I need, what all of those who are like me need, is your understanding and your compassion, Soren adds. As laudable as the message of The Outcast was, it also marked the limits of the issue for the next generation. Jonathan Frakes himself thought the episode wasn't gutsy enough. In truth, Star Trek would stop short of any kind of positive gay representation for quite some time. There had been another script written for the next generation which included gay characters more directly. For that story, we have to go back to before the series had even begun. Number 3. Is the Enterprise a closet? Gene Roddenberry is going to do it again. That's how then president of Paramount Television Group Mel Harris announced the brand new Star Trek series to the world on Friday, 10th of October 1986. The following month, Roddenberry was celebrating the 20th anniversary of the franchise at The Bash, a Star Trek convention held in Boston, and so was original series and soon-to-be Next Generation writer David Gerrold. In the crowd of fans was Franklin Hummel, co-founder of fan group the Galaxian Science Fiction Society of Boston, later the Galactic Network and Galaxians International. Hummel proceeded to ask Roddenberry if, given the groundbreaking representation on the bridge of the original Enterprise, there would be a gay character on the new series. According to Gerrold, who was taking notes, Roddenberry gave the following reply: "Sooner or later, we'll have to address the issue. We should probably have a gay character." Cinefantastique, Volume 23, Numbers 2 and 3 from October 1992 reported that, during a staff meeting later that year, Roddenberry reiterated his desire to include a gay character on the show, to which producer Robert Justman apparently replied, "What do you want, Lieutenant Tutti Frutti?" No, seriously, it is time that we acknowledge this," Roddenberry hit back. With Roddenberry's support, Gerrold then set about writing a script that would notably include two gay male characters as lovers. Entitled Blood and Fire, the episode was also to serve as an allegory for HIV/AIDS. Gerrold had recently learnt that Michael Miner, illustrator art direction on Star Trek the Motion Picture and Star Trek The Wrath of Khan, who was being considered as art director for the Next Generation, was seriously ill with AIDS. Miner sadly passed away at only 46 years old in May of 1987. Unfortunately, as stated in Cinefantastique and further confirmed in Star Trek The Next Generation, The Continuing Mission, the memos began to circulate. People complained the script had blatant homosexual characters, Gerrold recalled. Rick Berman said, "We can't do this in an afternoon market in some places. We'll have parents writing letters." Whilst others, like Dorothy Fontana, praised the script, Gerrold was still obliged to rewrite it and remove the gay characters. Strangely, and in spite of having sent a few memos himself, Robert Justman changed his tune, reportedly arguing for the gay characters be put back in, stating, "Why are we afraid of showing gay characters on Star Trek? What are we, wusses?" More rewrites followed, but eventually Gerrold, frustrated, just abandoned the idea. He left The Next Generation altogether soon after. Gerrold did eventually release Blood and Fire in book form in 2003, and his script was rewritten and adapted to the original series era for the 2008 two-part episode Blood and Fire of fan production Star Trek Phase 2, formerly Star Trek New Voyages. In that, now Ensign Peter Kirk, nephew of James T., is in a relationship with Lieutenant Alexander Freeman, and the couple are engaged to be married, but not before the Enterprise encounters the Copernicus, a ship infected by plasmacytes, which transmute into Regulan bloodworms. All that was bold for a fan production even in 2008. In the late 1980s, Gerald's original script would have been nothing short of revolutionary for television's 24th century. Ultimately, however, Gene Roddenberry's promise of a more sexually diverse future clashed with the reality, and Star Trek continued to trail behind on gay issues. It would be several years before Trek addressed the HIV/AIDS crisis too. There is one other episode, The Host, which has sparked multiple reactions and interpretations over the years, from friendly-ish hint at homosexuality to outright homophobic rejection. As per The Next Generation in general, Dr. Crusher's "perhaps someday our ability to love won't be so limited" of The Host's final scene marked the deferral of queer potential towards a hypothetically queerer future of a hypothetical future that should already have been queer enough. Far from woke or aware of the issue, The Next Generation forced its gay characters back into hiding. For them and for gay viewers, all the Enterprise D was a closet. Number 2. Rainbow Warriors. They wanted proof? I'm going to give it to them, said Dr. Serova before blowing up her ship, and herself along with it, to prove her theory about the damaging effects of warp drive on subspace. That kind of eco-radicalism, as depicted in Season 7's Force of Nature, would easily be decried as woke in its co-optive form these days. If we take a trip back to 1993, however, it would be difficult to argue that The Next Generation was ahead of its time on this particular issue. It was, at least, trying to keep up with it. The real world had certainly been woke to environmentalism for quite some time before 1993. The 1970s and 1980s had been a hotbed of climate activism, with the first Earth Day taking place back in April 1970. Greenpeace's Rainbow Warrior, the ship, had been sailing the seas since 1978, campaigning to save the whales, a cause dear to Star Trek as well, of course, and protesting against nuclear testing and the dumping of nuclear waste. In 1985, the Rainbow Warrior was bombed and sunk by French Secret Service agents, causing the death of Greenpeace photographer Fernando Pereira. In the 1990s, there was also a turning point for public and political awareness of climate change following the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, aka the Earth Summit of 1992. No matter how much we love it, Star Trek is a television show. The stakes shouldn't be much higher than entertainment, and they definitely aren't life or death. In that, perhaps we've all been a little unkind to Force of Nature. The Star Trek The Next Generation companion called the episode a disappointing though worthwhile message show, while its writer, Naren Shankar, commented, "It wasn't one of my finer moments." Jerry Taylor thought it was a doomed premise to start with. In the end, being woke doesn't mean you have to change the world. It simply means, to paraphrase the comedian Lotus Weinstock, that you should be able to leave the room with a little dignity. When it came to representing the issues that mattered, The Next Generation, by and large, and Force of Nature too, managed to leave the room with its head held high. Number 1. The Right Way and the Roe Way. Before Star Trek Deep Space Nine was even a thing, The Next Generation introduced us to the Bajorans, or Bajora, through Ensign Ro Laren in the eponymous episode that was specifically designed for us to meet her. Ro was meant to shake up the Federation's typically comfortable morals and laurels with a backstory that wasn't Starfleet Academy's sweetness and light, as Rick Berman noted in the Captain's Logs, the unauthorized Complete Trek Voyages. The introduction of a strong woman, often embroiled in conflict, and her acceptance by the fans was one of our greatest achievements of the season, added Michael Piller in the Star Trek The Next Generation companion. As for the thought process and inspirations behind the Bajorans themselves, producers have refused to pin down a real-world origin story. In an AOL chat in 1997, Rick Berman stated, "We didn't really try to make Bajor a direct analogy to any specific contemporary country or people. Blending the experiences of many Earth peoples and races into our storytelling allows us to comment on these subjects without advocating a particular political point of view, while at the same time allowing us to view the topics in a different light without the baggage of contemporary politics." Politics they did do, nevertheless, via Ensign Ro. In Journey's End, we learned that a demilitarized zone had been established between the Federation and Cardassian space as part of the Treaty of 2370. As a result, certain Federation colonies along the border were handed over to the Cardassians and vice versa. One of those colonies was a group of Native Americans who had come to call the planet Dorvan 5 their home for over 20 years. In Journey's End, Captain Picard was ordered to relocate them, but the colonists resolved to stay with the Cardassians in charge. Soon, the Maquis resistance formed to fight against Cardassian occupation of their homes across the DMZ. Ro, now lieutenant, seeing the injustice for herself in preemptive strike, decided to join the Maquis, as did several other Starfleet officers at the time. Still, even 30 years later, with everything that happened in the interim, Picard had to be talked out of his grudge against Ro. The strength of the Next Generation is that the Ro way, in spite of Picard's protestations, is never depicted as the wrong or indeed the right way. We are merely presented with the information, allowed to draw our own parallels and invited to reason our way through. That is the best message the Next Generation ever offered us, that to reason is always the woker thing to do. Thank you so much to everyone for watching along. We really appreciate you. Thank you so much to Jack Kiley for writing the article upon which this video is based. You can check that out on whatculture.com. Now make sure that you're following us on the various socials. We're on Twitter and the various at TrekCulture. We're on Instagram at TrekCultureYT. I am at Sean Ferrick on the various socials. I can be found with a swift Google. Thank you. You are awesome. You are wonderful. Make sure that you live long and prosper. Make sure you treat yourself and treat the people around you well. And sure, that's a pretty good way of living your life. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.